They're calling this the redemption game, the redemption game. Ryan, does this game still hold a lot of hype for you, even though Texas is unranked and they're 3-2?
You know, it does hold a lot of hype for everybody. I think Bo Pelini's lying when he says it's just another game. And you'll see that when he comes out the way he coaches. He's not going to come into this game the same way he went into the South Dakota State game. It's just the way, you know, all our minds work. He just can't do that. There's a little bit of anger there. There's a little bit of, you know, he wants payback. He's not going to say those things. You know, it's never been Bo. He's never really been super candid about things like that. Players are going to get pumped. The biggest thing you need to see coming to this game is that they're not over pumped. You don't waste too much energy in pregame. Just go out there, play your game, and Nebraska right now on paper is the better team, but we don't play these games on paper. We play them on the field.
Very true. Texas is coming in.
The first 5 minutes, I think, is really going to be a telling sign of what Texas team we're going to see. I think we know what Nebraska team we're going to see. What Texas team are we going to see? The Texas team that got killed by UCLA, or the Texas team that almost beat Alabama in the championship game with a freshman quarterback? Yeah, well, and he only threw 7 balls in that game as well, and that's got to be a concern. He was 5 for 7. You know, he found some wide open receivers, but you're only throwing 7 balls. That doesn't give you a chance to show, you know, how good you are or whatever, and it hides some things from Texas. But Texas, you know, they showed some of that read option against UCLA when Texas played them, and UCLA was able to successfully run the read option a couple times against Texas. Texas said they got their gaps figured out, that kind of stuff, but it'll be interesting to see if when Taylor Martinez is forced to pass, because they're going to put a few guys in the box and try to stop him from running. Can he take advantage of that? And I think a big guy to watch for is a guy like Niles Paul, who really has been non-existent so far. You hope that, you know, they've worked some kinks out between Martinez and Paul, but and maybe Martinez can get something going, because Martinez isn't going to, if he has to pass the ball a lot, I think that's going to really show the test of how good he really is. And we're back here at Memorial Stadium. I'm Ryan Penny, joined alongside by Michael Scholes here for the Husker Countdown post-game show. And a pretty sad Memorial Stadium, a pretty dejected Memorial Stadium. They basically stayed all till the end. It got a little exciting near the end when Eric Haig was able to return that big old squib punt all the way to the house to make it a one-touchdown game. And then the defense just couldn't stop Texas, and that seemed to be the story of the day, was the defense and offense both underproving. Really, they just didn't do a whole lot. Michael, got to start off with the switch from Taylor Martinez to Zach Lee. What's your take? I mean, what does Coach Pelini and Coach Watson think they're going to get from going to Taylor Martinez to Zach Lee? Because honestly, the decision, I think, baffled some of us up here.
Well, I think it's fair to say it baffled all of us up here, you know, most of us, and probably most of the Husker fans out there today. But you know, I think there is some logic. I think there's some logic behind the decision, but after Lee was in, I don't know if it was managed very well. Zach Lee comes into the game as a senior. He started all year last year. He's got experience in big games. He played against Texas in the Big 12 championship game. Granted, his performance was not great there, but I think what they're looking for Zach Lee in that situation is someone who can manage the game, someone with some experience, someone who's not going to be intimidated coming in down by 2 touchdowns. You know, he led the Huskers on a magnificent fourth quarter comeback against Missouri in the rain in Columbia last year. So I think that's what they're looking for Zach Lee. But once Zach was in, I don't necessarily know if it was handled very well. If you're going to bring in Zach Lee, my opinion, I don't know if it makes much sense to keep running that zone read play. You obviously have a huge drop-off in ability and speed running the football with Zach Lee. I think if you bring Zach in, you need to open it up and try and throw the ball a little bit more, Ryan. So I understand the call, but I don't understand some of the play calling that followed the call.
Yeah, that baffled me as well, and I think it baffled a lot of the fans. Okay, you bring in Zach Lee. He probably has better touch on his passes, and then you run the option read, the read option, whatever you want to call it, and it worked slightly because they weren't queuing on Zach. The ball was going to Rex Burkhead, who looked great at times, and then when Zach would keep it, I mean, he would have open holes, and he just couldn't burst through them. I mean, he'd get 3-4 yards here, and the offense became very slow, methodical at times, and that's not always a bad thing if you bring Zach Lee in maybe the second quarter. They're running out of time, and Zach Lee's slow, methodical play, and I don't blame Taylor Martinez for this loss. You have to look at the wide receivers dropping balls. Niles Paul dropped a ball. Rex Burkhead dropped a ball. Brandon Kinney dropped a ball. Those are 3 touchdowns right there they dropped. That is huge, and that's got to be, I mean, throughout this game, that's the one thing that Nebraska really struggled at, was doing the things that Coach Bo Pelini always says they have to do, and that's just going with the game plan and just playing. And they played terrible at times, and officials didn't always help, but you can't blame the officials for this loss if you're a Nebraska fan. Nebraska had many chances, and they just flat out didn't ring the bell when it came to that, and that really hurts them. Zach Lee looked well when he came in, but it's got to be frustrating for the Husker faithful. Looking forward, they go into Oklahoma State, Stillwater next week. That's October 23rd. That's going to be a tough game, taking on the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Interesting to see if Taylor Martinez or Zach Lee starts that game. Moving on. Real quick, who do you think your starter next week?
Oh, I think you go back to Taylor Martinez. I don't think there's any question there. You got Martinez.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, I want to thank Michael Scholes a lot for this little post game. It's definitely a sad and dejected Memorial Stadium, but the Huskers got to take this and move on. We'd like to thank the following people for making today's broadcast possible: Chancellor of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Harvey Perlman, and the Dean of the UNL College of Journalism and Mass Communications, Gary Keppel. Today's broadcast was produced by Rick Alloway and Jake Bogus. The Husker Countdown halftime and postgame shows were produced by Jake Bogus, Will Grubb, Joe Tablitsky, and myself and Michael Scholes. Our statistician for today's game was Andrew Lacey. Today's game was engineered by Jake Sorensen. Thank you very much, Jake. This broadcast was intended for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast, accounts, or descriptions are strictly prohibited without prior written consent of the College of Journalism and Mass Communications and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We remind you to tune in on October 30th when the Nebraska Cornhuskers take on the Missouri Tigers. I'm Ryan Penny with Michael Scholes. Once again, our final score today was Texas 20, Nebraska 13. Stay tuned for the post-game scoreboard show, and the Husker highlight shows are coming up next. You've been listening to Husker Football here on 90.3 KRNU Lincoln.